But let's go to Dan in Texas, who's been holding on. We've committed to talking with people, so let's do that. 866, and he's in Texas, by the way, not Sugarland. I'm sure not Sugarland. Dan, where are you? Welcome.
I'm over in the west side of Texas. You definitely put some hot sauce on the conversation going there with talking with the Bible and two genders, but I'll go back to my original thought. The thing that I called in about was Karen with you saying, Black identity. Your first thing was Black identity. The first thing that I identify with is I'm Dan. I'm not a white Dan. I'm not a black Dan. I'm not a Mexican.
What a privilege. Dan. What a privilege, Dan. What a privilege to be Dan. Do you realize that to be Dan, to walk in the world, I'm making some assumptions about you because you are able to be Dan, and I'm not able to just be Karen. Do you recognize that this is not my choosing? When I get up in the morning and brush my teeth, I don't think about being black or a woman. I think about being Karen, and it's very, very clear. But then I walk into the world. And here we are.
Amen.
Here we go. Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
How long have you been listening to this show?
About 3 days.
Oh, there we go. I knew it. Because, to be offended, because you said you were a little offended by me talking about whiteness with anger, which I wasn't. I don't believe there's such a thing as being white. So first of all, in my world, I would love for you to be Dan and me to be Karen and Dr. Mitchell to be Dr. Mitchell, because we're going to always give her honorific. And not have to deal with race because it is an ideology. It is a power structure. It is a made up construct. There's no such thing as whiteness or blackness for that matter. But this system that we live in has placed us in these caste systems, in these caste positions that because of the complexion that I have, I can't leave the caste. Whereas somebody who back in the day was Italian got an entree into whiteness that they didn't have when they came here and out through Ellis Island. The Irish before them, Jews wax and wane whether or not they can be white, depending on the climate. I'm going to see what's about to happen now, and the Latinos got to be white. If you come from Cuba, not so much, if you're a white Cuban, but if you are a dark complected Cuban, not at all, versus the Haitians, it's a wild thing. So you do realize that race is a made up construct, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you called up to, wag your finger at me to say what?
No, ma'am. No, not at all. Not at all. There was no wagging of the finger.
Okay.
No, I wasn't offended. I just wanted to call to reiterate too that even speaking of biblical talking of, white Jesus and the flowing, stringing hair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm saying something because I'm saying something, Dan, that has to be said because we don't say it. It's just, I've gone into black churches and that same Jesus has been there. So you're praying to somebody, to a person, to a figure that doesn't exist in reality, right? So what are you indoctrinating people into? If that is God in flesh form, then God can only look like that. And that is not the way God is, right? So I'm saying something much broader, but 3 days in, it's Monday. So I'm assuming you came in on a Thursday. What brought you here?
I'm genuinely just curious to listen to the other side because
okay. All right. Sorry. I'm going to cut you off again, bro. I'm going to cut you off again. What other side? What are the two sides?
There was a gentleman that called
No. What are the two sides?
Well, let me explain who directed me your way. Was a gentleman that called in who was upset about he wouldn't be heard. And he said, I try to call into this other radio station and they wouldn't even hear me out. So I just wanted to listen to hear what the other viewpoint was that he was speaking of, not my own opinion.
Okay.
Now
where was this guy? Where did you hear this guy talking about this show?
It was a podcast. I don't remember. It was on the iPhone podcast.
Oh. And he talked about this show specifically, and he said he wasn't allowed, because here's the thing, there are rules of engagement here. I know the world is an echo chamber of people yelling into the void, but there's a standard of how we will communicate, right? So you're gonna come in with respect, what you did, so I respect that. But also, we're gonna agree on a set of facts. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna have you won't just get to just say things without being checked. and people aren't used to being checked, Dan. So it's an interesting dynamic to have a radio show where we do want to have conversations with people, but folk are so far up their own behinds about what they believe and think and know without any study, with no reading, without any understanding of actual history, haven't done any work, but their opinion is supposed to be equal to mine. And that just doesn't sit right. So, come in ready to have a conversation without and I appreciate that you did. So so I'm going to invite you to continue to listen, but have your last word.
So you guys assumed genders races of that I'm a white or whatever race. But I'll say that we're all affected by crap government, which really irritates me. My brother was killed by a police officer with being absolutely slandered in the media. And yes, I'm not a black person, but what I will say is I sympathize with watching people go through that because it's disgusting, and wanting to come into the other side to be open to learn and hear the viewpoint and not be attacked is fantastic. So you got another listener. I'm going to continue to listen and probably call back in and try to talk more, because that's what's needed. And what forgiveness is for the person that's hurt, not for the person you're asking forgiveness from. So I did that with the cop that killed my brother, and it was truly healing.
Yeah.
That's all. And thank you guys. You got another listener. I'm going to continue to listen. Thanks.
Well, welcome, Dan in Texas. Dr. Mitchell.
Well, the thing that exchange made me want to say is that the thing that Americans don't do, and always I'm talking about American culture, right? Our discourses and practices, our words and deeds, what is most commonly said in these United States. So one of the things that American culture is really, really dishonest. So it's dishonest in the way that we act as if being white in the United States, being perceived as white in the United States, isn't a very particular experience. We act as if it's just the neutral experience or the norm experience, that it's somehow benign. So for example, Dan in Texas probably is able to go into any given store and not be followed around as if he's a criminal rather than a customer. Whereas it is almost universal for Black and brown people to walk into stores and be treated more like criminals than as customers. American culture would be more honest if we recognize that white experience in this country is very particular and it comes with unearned advantages. So that is part of what you address whenever you talk about Blackness, for example, as a fiction, but one that you wear with pride because you recognize that Black people have made community and made culture out of horrible circumstances of oppression, that we recognize that we can make something that is beyond our oppression. And that is what Black culture represents. So that is what Blackness has represented, an insistence to live and survive despite the oppression. And whiteness has been a very violent structure that gets to parade as innocent. That is how it is functioning in the United States. And part of what was encouraging to me in these last couple months is seeing more and more white people who were willing to say that they recognize how whiteness is weaponized and that they are insistent upon using the privileges that come with being perceived as white. They know it comes with privileges and they're trying to use it for more people's benefit. That recognition is what it takes to do something different with the American way. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
The American way is just violence.
And you can't just be agnostic with it, right? So a couple of people like, Dan's a troll. I don't think Dan is a troll. I think I think he has had the privilege again to not have to consider, what does it mean to be white? I didn't even go through that with him. What does it mean to be white in America? What does it mean to be white anywhere? And, to watch those children carry a T-Rump flag through the hallways and call people the N-word and tell people to go back to their country. At its worst, Black Lives Matter was just saying, don't kill us.
Okay.
at its worst. We can get into the, behind the scenes, all that. But the phrase itself was, we deserve to live, right? There was no indictment. There was no telling people to, other than defund police. And even that was about, can we use these resources to not put military weaponry in Black communities and tanks in Black communities and riot gear in Black communities? Can we have if somebody like Elijah McClain is having a mental health break, can we send a social worker out instead of shooting having a police officer kill him? If George Floyd passed a bad bill and he's having a mental health break, do we need to kneel on his neck for 9 minutes until he dies? Or is this something that a mental health professional can come in and deal with, right? There has to be humanity in everything. And what I don't see from folk, even in victory, there's a lot of vitriol and nastiness among folk who y'all won. Is this what winning looks like to you? When your team wins, you're going to burn up the cars and turn over the cars and trash the city. Is this who you are? And if
Although
this is
that
who
is
you
what
are,
happens, isn't it?
I'm asking a question, Dr. Mitchell, with all sincerity. When you win, if you tear up the city and burn down things, how are we to look at you anything other than a knuckle dragging Neanderthal, somebody that is not fully formed as a person? That is not to me what victors do. People who win don't do that, right? So there's a lot here to consider in this whole notion of the other side. There are only two sides. It's right and wrong. So I'm always going to ask that question: which side are you on? Because my side wants everyone to eat, to have a house, to have a roof over their heads, maybe not a house, but definitely not to live under a bridge. I want people who come here who are fleeing something horrible, as we had Ellis Island for folk who were fleeing something horrible, most of which we created. Those environments in these other places, America created those environments. And then we want people to sit there and suffer. And we don't give them a pathway to come here when most of your ancestors came here, except for mine that came in the hulls of ships to build this country. But we should, and if we have that conversation in the classroom, I'm going to get brought up on some sort of, I'm going to be, if I'm in Florida, somebody's going to say I'm breaking the law to have that conversation. Is this the country you want to live in, where we are burning books, where we're not talking about things like, listen, getting into gender, which is so weird to me that's the trigger for so many of you.